Hello everyone! It's almost Halloween, so it felt like a good time to talk about hell. Well, I've done it. I've reached the final Bleach film that's been produced as of yet, and this one is kind of a doozy. So grab your popcorn, your pitchforks, and all of the chains you can find as we take the plunge down into the depths of the inferno with Bleach's fourth film, Hellverse. Before we get into the movie itself, we need to address that this particular film apparently comes with a little bit more baggage than its predecessors, while the others all fall into simply being apparently semi-canon with memories of nobody, or not canon at all, like movies 2 and 3. Hellverse was, I guess, publicly kind of disowned by Tite Kubo, though disowned might be too harsh of a word. But from what I understand, he asked to have his name removed from the credits because of how little he was involved with the production, after many of his proposed ideas for it weren't actually transmitted to the finished film. According to my Bleach-loving friend, the film's depiction of hell is actually very different from how Kubo would have done it, and how he pictures the place to really be in the universe that he created. That's fair enough, and absolutely a shame because I would have loved to have seen what he had in mind, but it doesn't really shift my view of the film itself too much, because I already view these movies kind of as being separate entities from the main series entirely. I do wish they had used Kubo's concepts, but I'm going to try not to let that distract me from reviewing the film and its ideas on its own merits. Thankfully, we've seen so little of Hell in Bleach proper that the depiction of it here didn't feel wrong or like out of place with the lore like the twins Zanpakuto in movie 2 did. The hell that we see here may not jive with what Kubo wants to be canon, but if he hadn't said that these aren't his original concepts, and if I didn't know that, I could see this fitting pretty naturally into the Bleach world, or at least close enough. Like I said, it's not even remotely as distracting as the twins Zanpakuto stuff in Diamond Dust Rebellion. That threw me for a loop and made me question things throughout the whole movie, but this, if I didn't learn about Kubo's lack of involvement, I would have thought that these all were, his ideas in this film. But getting the chance to explore hell in Bleach, even outside of canon, is just such a fun idea that's ripe for exploration, and I was immediately excited about. Literally, all that we've seen of hell before this is that one kind of iconic and extremely memorable scene of the gate appearing to pull Shrieker into hell all that time ago, like one of the first chapters of Bleach. That was such an incredible moment that hasn't gotten any follow-up. Maybe it's just my hollow loving heart, but I would have loved a Shrieker cameo in this movie, especially because he's the one connection that we have to hell in the actual manga, the one confirmed resident. But what an image that was that has stuck with me ever since and was brought back wonderfully here. I completely understand why they went this route. The glimpse of Hell's Gate in the manga is so memorable and practically begs for further exploration. So this was such a natural direction to take a movie. And it does well with the things that we have seen in the manga when it shows those things, like the opening reanimated fight between Ichigo and Ukiura was wild. It was a hell of a way to start a movie. The anime did a good job with that fight already, and this version of it, with this budget, was just glorious to behold. It was just a really cool and unexpected way to kick it all off, and I liked how it did end up tying into the villain's motivations, even if I don't understand how a fiery skull in hell can give like a live feed on what's going on in Hueco Mundo, but I'm also not going to pretend that I understand hell magic. I'm just gonna chalk it up to demons. Alright, it was demons, it was hellfire, it was hellhounds. It must be the same live feeds that all the residents of hell in the Dragon Ball Z anime used. Whatever the case, it really was glorious though to see the fight for those few minutes presented like that, and Kubo apparently publicly praised this sequence in particular, rightfully so, because it was breathtaking. And I haven't really dug into the looks of these movies much, and instead have focused much more on their individual stories, but with this film, I really have to talk about the visual. While the first 3 films were impressive as upgrades to what the anime was doing at the time, Hellverse is on a whole other level. The visuals in this movie are absolutely popping off the screen. Just some beautiful work. And with such a different place to explore like hell itself, it gives the opportunity to see things that we've never seen before in Bleach. At least where I'm at in the anime, Bleach had never looked better at the time. This looked amazing. So the movie starts off as kind of a fun snapshot of what Bleach is, even if some of it is like almost verbatim what we've seen before, although more visually impressive than ever, like Ichigo beating up some bullies that upset a ghost kid, and then going home where his dad attacks him, and then his dad fawns over Misaki's photo. It's all very familiar, but this is probably for the benefit of viewers who maybe aren't familiar with Ichigo or this world, so we get kind of a reintroduction to what he's like and to what this world is like, and I think it does a good job of capturing that. You immediately feel like you're watching Bleach. All the characters feel right. It feels a little comforting. I like it before we get into a lot of new things, like when we're suddenly attacked by these strange looking people. I liked the designs of the assailants from Hell when they first show up, and it turns out that these outfits that they're wearing are also functional, because when one breaks, the guy who was wearing it is immediately brought back to Hell, and it's a lot like what we saw with Shrieker way back with the gates and the giant hand impaling him and reining him back into the pit. But I am a little confused about these suits, since we see another prisoner from Hell that doesn't have one and no gate comes for him. Maybe I missed something as far as those are concerned, why some are wearing it while someone like Kokuto is not. If someone could explain that, that'd be awesome. Maybe I missed something, but this attack on Ichigo and his friends kind of felt like it went on a bit too long, but it looked beautiful in the sunset, and in the end, Ichigo's sister Yuzu was kidnapped, and we're introduced to a new ally, another escapee from Hell, a man named Kokuto, who becomes their guide as they descend into Hell to save Yuzu. Now, let's talk about Hell itself for a bit, because that's kind of the big draw of the movie after all, and honestly, despite apparently not being Kubo's vision of it, I actually really liked what we saw of Hell as it was presented in the movie. I was satisfied because it really did feel like we'd gone to this completely new dimension that was so far removed from anything we've seen in Bleach. This was nothing like Soul Society or Waco Mundo, and had its own vibe that was really fun to navigate. There were levels to it, as many depictions of Hell have, and I loved how distinctive those different places were, both from each other and from the usual locations of Bleach. Hell is one of those places that we have so often seen depicted in various ways across all media. A personal favorite of mine being my boy Crowley turning Hell into an endless waiting line in Supernatural, but I thought this Hell still found a way to stand out in the midst of so many other adaptations and iterations. Like, I loved the look in particular of like the sulfur wasteland, like that looked beautiful. There was of course a lot of fire, and then the whole first level where the guards were and a lot of the sinners with all the floating pillars and structures, all really cool looking. We're introduced to the Kusanada, the guardians of Hell, at least in this movie. They're the creatures that the giant hand skewering people through the gates of Hell belongs to. Again, at least in this movie. I don't know if that's who Kubo envisioned the hand belonged to, or if these Kusanada are anything like what he thought would be in Hell, but I can buy that these are the things that are on the other side of the gate. They're giant and intimidating and really cool looking, and they kill the sinners of Hell over and over and over again every day, so they're pretty scary as far as forces in the Bleach universe go. A little off topic, but does anyone else think that the Kusanada resemble that one robot pirate thing from Dragon Ball? That's where my mind immediately went to, and I haven't thought about that thing since I beat it up in Legacy of Goku 2 on the GBA like 20 years ago. Anyway, overall, I found them to be perfectly threatening and a very unique kind of obstacle for us to have to overcome. They represented a different kind of threat than the sinners, the more natural order of how things are supposed to run in Hell. As for the one that guides our characters, Kokuto had a striking design and was a pretty interesting character, but the plot twist was pretty obvious from the get-go, honestly, and this is me, and I'm usually pretty gullible, as you all know, especially when it comes to things like this, but maybe that's Kubo's lack of involvement showing. These writers didn't fool me the way that Kubo has fooled me. Still, it was a fun heel turn. Because of Kokuto's whole existence being an escaped prisoner of hell, the characters are naturally suspicious, given that would mean that he was most likely either a bad guy or at least had done something really bad to end up being in hell in the first place. So it's the movie's job to try to convince the viewers otherwise, to make us feel okay about him, just like the characters end up trusting him. Unfortunately, it never fully made me believe that he was actually an ally, but the reveal scene itself was pretty awesome. I loved how everything went silent when Ichigo was suddenly stabbed, and Kokuto ripping off his shroud to show his real face while completely becoming unhinged and stomping on people was all really effective. So I wasn't shocked personally, but narratively it still worked well enough. He's probably the best villain that we've seen in the Bleach movies, though the antagonists have never been like a major strength of the films, as I've talked about before, so it's kind of a really low bar, but still, I liked him. And frankly, I appreciate that the other villains were slightly more memorable and visually interesting than the other movie cronies have been. There's not much to them on character levels like usual, but they give some decent fights, and I really like some of the designs of these guys in particular. They looked properly hellish and demonic in some ways, like that big guy with the mouth on his torso that swallows energy, like that was really gross and unnerving, and there's also the guy with the tentacles for arms that are also coming out of his eyes and stuff, so they looked really cool. And I also just gotta respect the purple-haired fire guy's game, because he is such a nothing character and a nothing villain. Despite what all the posters for the movie make you think, he's not really important whatsoever. He is just a placeholder for the twist of Kokuto, but I still thought that he'd have something to do in the movie besides being a red herring just because of how much he was on the poster, front and center, but there's really nothing there, so good on him for snatching the spotlight that he definitely didn't need. The marketing was a solid cover-up. I fully believed going in that that guy was going to be at least a little bit more of a character than he was, but no, the real villain is all Kokuto, but he carries the weight pretty well, because Kokuto, after seeing Ichigo holify against Ukiura, wants him to unleash that power again, because it would be enough to destroy the chains that keep him bound to hell. It's an understandable motivation for someone suffering down there, that's for sure, and I liked the idea that being in hell draws out your darkest impulses, which for Ichigo means that he could more easily and unintentionally transform back into that hollow form that he was when he fought Ukiura. And that's exactly what Kokuto wants and needs from him, and when Ichigo finally does, the movie does a great job of showing the destructive, wild power that he has in that state. I did notice one kind of weird and maybe stupid thing with Kokuto's whole plan and how things play out. So his goal was, as I said, for Ichigo to use his hollow power to break the chains that bound Kokuto to hell. He had already gotten Ichigo to trust him this far, to the point that Ichigo promised him that he would break Kokuto's chains. So he promised to do the thing that Kokuto wanted, without any sort of betrayal or pressure or forcing him to do anything. So, yeah, why did Kokuto reveal himself to be bad? If he had just kept up the pretense and kept being a friend and an ally, Ichigo was going to willingly break the chain, so Kokuto could have just waited. And eventually his chain might have been broken by the guy that thought they were friends. Or maybe not. Maybe he needed Ichigo to be upset and mad and angry enough to, give in to his worst impulses to transform, since apparently that form was the only way to break the chain. So there's that maybe. Maybe playing nice wouldn't have gotten Ichigo to that point. That could be an explanation, and maybe it is, but it just seemed a little silly that he had already gotten Ichigo to agree to break the chains, only to then give him reason to definitely not want to do that. You were so close, man. But then again, once Kokuto reveals his true nature, he turns out to be pretty crazy, so I don't know. It just seemed like a little oversight by Kokuto. He could have tried being nice for a little bit longer maybe. Anyway, Hellverse is probably the most exciting of the films, and maybe even the most entertaining from a spectacle standpoint. It's just a much grander of an adventure than any of the movies had taken Ichigo on before, with all of these massive locations and set pieces, all accompanied by some amazing music and some truly impressive visuals. The whole thing just feels enormous, even when its plot is relatively simple, maybe even a little too simple sometimes. Like, the story isn't really the strength of Hellverse, so some holes or things not fleshed out enough makes sense. It's a lot of crazy full throttle action and running around from place to place with not a lot of downtime. So it admittedly doesn't carry a lot of the same emotional weight as the previous films. It doesn't devote as much time to character relationships, or secret histories, or small heartfelt moments. Instead, Hellverse is much more of a sprawling action-adventure flick, but that's not to say that it's entirely devoid of any emotion. In fact, I think the movie does a great job of mixing those emotions into the thrills, even if there aren't as many moments as some of the prior movies. For instance, I liked that the film touched on Ichigo's love for his sisters, which is a relationship that isn't often explored in the manga, but is such an important piece of who Ichigo is. Having Kokuto also have a sister, someone that he lost and then committed atrocities to avenge, shined an interesting light on Ichigo as something of a warped reflection. We know that Ichigo's biggest desire is to be able to protect his loved ones. That's what he's all about, and we see in this movie what he's willing to do, like diving into hell itself to try to save Yuzu. But even more than that, we see what he can turn into when he thinks he's lost his sister, or that he's lost his other friends. Kokuto became a monster after a loss like that, and Ichigo is on the verge of becoming the same thing. It made for a pretty interesting dynamic between the two characters, a shared understanding about protecting one's sister. And that was pretty much the emotional crux of the movie, even though, like I said, there isn't much time devoted to it. I did like that there was something there. There was some sort of emotional foundation for the movie. Another thing that I really liked about Hellverse was that it didn't follow what has kind of become a major formula with these movies. Usually whatever threat they're facing becomes big enough that we get to see, like, all of the captains come and fight for a scene or two, and while that can be fun, it was nice to not really follow that same route. Yes, the other Soul Reapers become appraised of the situation as it intensifies, but the third act remains focused mostly on Ichigo's fight, instead of taking time to, like, show Kenny eviscerate some grunt. As much as I love to see that, I appreciate the restraint and changing up what had literally happened in all of the other movies. And Ichigo breaching the gates of hell and descending down to the lowest levels while other Soul Reapers look on, and number 1 starts playing, was just such an awe-inspiring moment that instantly gave me so many chills. It was so cool. And in the climax, when Ichigo is fighting to protect his friends, I liked that hell itself became an ally to him. There was just something very mythic about these huge guardians of hell all coming to aid Ichigo and loan him extra power against a common threat. Ichigo's transformation in this movie is one of those, like, this'll work for a film, kind of random transformations. It's a look we've never seen before that is very different than how he's ever looked. Like, you know how much I love skeletons, but I feel like there were ways to make this look way cooler than it does. I don't know, it just doesn't really work for me personally. It just looks a bit too goofy when I want it to be intimidating and cool. I think it's the headpiece kind of just stuck onto him. It doesn't work for me, but it's not a huge deal since I doubt we'll ever see it again. It was just kind of a random upgrade to help solve the problem, but it's a look, Ichigo, but you've had much better looks. All in all, I had a lot of fun with Hellverse. It was extremely entertaining and really stunning visually. Did it make me cry like Memories of Nobody did? No. But I don't think they was ever really trying to do that. To me, Hellverse was the first Bleach movie that truly felt like a large-scale blockbuster. And while it wasn't laced with heavy emotional depth, and the big twist was pretty obvious almost immediately, that didn't detract from how much fun I had watching the movie. It was far from deep and far from complex, but honestly, it was a hell of a good time. So this ends my reviews of the Bleach movies, at least until maybe eventually they'll make more. Thank you for coming along on this mini journey with me as I've tackled them. This was a really fun one to end on, but I enjoyed these side adventures while I'm going through the actual story of Bleach. I hope you all enjoyed, and I wish you a fun, safe, and spooky Halloween. The wife and I will be handing out candy as Gambit and Rogue from X-Men, so go have a good Halloween however you celebrate. Don't do anything that'll send you to hell. I'll talk to you all later. Take care. Bye.